Better? Okay. So you all know what my specialty is, or at least what it's become over the last few years in mast cell disease, and I'll just try to take you over the next hour or so through many of the current concepts in mast cell disease. These will be our learning objectives, and I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose. And this will be the general outline of the talk. We'll review briefly about allergic diseases and mastocytosis, the forms of mast we've long known about, and then we'll spend the majority of the talk on the new kid on the block, mast cell activation syndrome. And I'll finish up at the end with just a little bit on the research we're currently conducting in mast cell activation disease at my institution. So this is the landscape of the allergic diseases. I mean, we've all heard of allergy. We all know people who are allergic. But it's really becoming quite the prevalent problem, and we don't fully understand why. About 10% of the world's population now suffers allergies to one extent or another. The prevalence of the problem is steadily increasing. We don't know why. And we do know that there are some genetic factors to allergy, but there are environmental factors too. And the development of allergy is some complex interplay between genetic factors and environmental factors. Many people in the public and many healthcare professionals sort of downplay the significance of allergy because it generally does not shorten one's life. But from another perspective, that's all the more reason why it should be regarded as quite important. Because if you're going to be living your entire life with it, and if it is severe enough to impact your quality of life, your QOL, then it becomes more important to get it under control. So allergy is sort of the one form of mast cell disease, a very common form. And this is the other form of mast cell disease that we've known about for, about 130 years, if I'm doing my math right. We've known about mastocytosis, a rare disease, since the late 1880s. The mast cell itself was discovered in the late 1860s. The first disease which we later understood to be involved with mast cells was discovered in the late 1860s, a particular type of rash called urticaria pigmentosa, and then a decade later the mast cell was discovered, and then another decade to link the two together. And then you have to fast forward half a century to get to the point where we started to get a sense that there might be some forms of internal mast cell disease. And that's about the point at which the first mast cell mediators were starting to be discovered. And ultimately, we began developing some classification systems for the disease. A key mutation that is integrally involved in driving most cases of systemic mastocytosis was found by a couple of different research groups in Japan in the mid-90s. A group in Spain found some other key methods for diagnosing mast cell disease, something called flow cytometry. It's a general technique in the laboratory, and there's a particular finding with flow cytometry that can help identify malignant mast cells, as we see in mastocytosis. And then in 2001, the World Health Organization came out with its classification system for mastocytosis, and that coincidentally was the same year that imatinib, its brand name Gleevec, became available. It of course was developed originally for a type of leukemia called chronic myeloid leukemia, but some smart people soon figured out that it was useful in a particular small subpopulation of patients with mastocytosis. The great majority of patients with systemic mastocytosis are not going to respond to imatinib because they have that KIT D816V mutation, which renders somebody usually resistant to imatinib, but there's a small subpopulation of the patients with systemic mastocytosis who don't have that mutation, and those patients seem to be the ones who respond quite nicely to imatinib. As the 2000s rolled on and the early part of this decade, we increasingly came to appreciate that it's really not so much the overgrowth of mast cells in mastocytosis that's the problem. Yeah, there are some rare subtypes of the rare disease of systemic mastocytosis, particularly aggressive subtypes that we call aggressive systemic mastocytosis and mast cell leukemia, where it's the overgrowth of mast cells that is the key problem. But for the great majority of folks with mastocytosis, even if they have a lot of mast cells in them, it's not that load of mast cells that's really the principal problem. Rather, it's the inappropriate activation of those mast cells that's the problem. So this is the spectrum of mast cell disease we've known for a long time, this mountain, in which allergies and anaphylaxis comprise the largest portion of the mountain. Again, about 20% of the general population is known to have allergy of one fashion or another. About 10% of the population has another form of benign mast cell disease called urticarias and angioedema. And then there's the rare disease of mastocytosis in its cutaneous forms and its systemic forms. Cutaneous forms actually are tenfold more common than systemic forms, to give you a sense of just how rare systemic mastocytosis is. So the whole mountain here features inappropriate activation of the mast cells, but it's only the mastocytosis portion of the mountain that additionally features inappropriate growth or proliferation of the mast cells. So that's what we've known for a long time. So let's talk further about this new concept of mast cell activation disease. We didn't used to call it that. We just called it mast cell disease. Well, now we're calling it mast cell activation disease, and that's just to remind ourselves in each patient that